the shadowed corridors of the galaxy, where power is measured not in lightsabers, but in secrets, where empires rise and fall on whispered information and hidden allegiances, there existed a criminal syndicate that would challenge the very foundations of the empire itself. This is the story of Crimson Dawn, an organization born from the ashes of a fallen Sith Lord's ambition, shaped by decades of betrayal and bloodshed, and ultimately wielded as a weapon against the dark side itself by those who dared to imagine a galaxy free from Sith domination. The Crimson Sun emblem, that stylized sunrise rendered in shades of blood and fire, would become synonymous with fear and sophisticated brutality across 1,000 worlds. From the industrial slums of Corellia to the luxury towers of Coruscant, from the spice mines of Kessel to the palatial yachts of the galaxy's elite, that symbol represented power that operated beyond the reach of conventional authority. Behind that crimson sunrise lay a web of conspiracy that stretched from the Clone Wars through the height of Imperial rule to the Empire's final days, touching the lives of smugglers and Sith Lords alike, of bounty hunters and royalty, of slaves and emperors. To understand Crimson Dawn is to understand how ambition, when channeled through the criminal underworld with patience and strategic brilliance, can shake the foundations of even the most powerful regimes. It is to understand how one woman, starting from absolute powerlessness, could rise to command resources and loyalty sufficient to threaten beings who commanded the Force itself. It is to grasp how a criminal organization founded for profit and revenge could transform into something approaching a rebellion, how the tools of darkness could be turned against those who had perfected its use. Our journey begins not with criminals, not with the desperate thieves and smugglers who populate the galaxy's margins, but with something far more dangerous, a being who had tasted death and returned from depths of suffering that should have destroyed any mortal mind, a warrior who had been broken utterly and remade through sheer force of hatred, a Sith who refused to stay defeated even when his own master had cast him aside as broken refuse. The return of Darth Maul, the galaxy believed him dead. Cut in half by a Jedi Padawan's blade and cast into the abyss, Darth Maul should have been nothing more than a footnote in history. Another fallen apprentice of Darth Sidious, another casualty of the Sith's eternal hunger for power. But the dark side does not release its servants so easily. On the junk world of Lotho Minor, in the bowels of forgotten machinery and refuse, something survived. Not a man, but a creature driven mad by pain and hatred. Maul clung to existence through sheer force of will, his bisected body sustained by the dark side, his mind shattered into fragments of rage and loss. For over a decade he endured, a living nightmare in mechanical spider legs, cobbled together from scrap. His sanity fled, leaving only one coherent thought burning through the chaos: revenge. Against the Jedi who had cut him down, against the Master who had abandoned him, against a galaxy that had forgotten his name. Salvation came in the form of family. Savage Opress, Maul's brother, found him in that mechanical hell, a night brother of Dathomir, twisted into a warrior by Mother Talzin's dark magics. Savage had been searching for the sibling he never knew. What he discovered was barely recognizable as sentient. Mother Talzin, the leader of the Night Sisters and Maul's own mother, used her ancient sorcery to restore her sons, mind and body. The spider legs gave way to new cybernetic limbs. The madness receded, replaced by cold, calculating fury. When Darth Maul opened his eyes with clarity for the first time in years, the galaxy would soon learn to fear that gaze once more. Maul's resurrection brought with it a revelation that would shape everything to come. His former master, Darth Sidious, had replaced him. Count Dooku, or Darth Tyrannus, as he was known in the shadows, now stood at Sidious's side. The Sith rule of two demanded it. There could only be two, and Maul was no longer one of them. This knowledge burned through Maul like acid. He had been discarded, thrown away like a broken tool. The rage this ignited was not the mindless fury of his years in madness, but something far more dangerous, focused, purposeful, patient. But Maul understood his position. He could not simply challenge Sidious directly. His former master had grown too powerful, too entrenched in his schemes. The Clone Wars themselves were Sidious's design, a grand manipulation to seize control of the entire galaxy. To oppose Sidious openly would be suicide. Instead, Maul would build his own empire. He would create his own power base. And when the time was right, he would use it to strike at everything Sidious had built. This decision marked the birth of something new in the criminal underworld. Not just another gang, but a coalition of darkness that would rival the Sith themselves in scope and ambition. Forging the Shadow Collective Maul was many things, but he was not a fool. He recognized that his strength alone would not be enough to challenge the established order. He needed allies. He needed resources. He needed an army. The galaxy's criminal underworld presented an opportunity. Fractured, competitive, and hungry for power, these syndicates could be unified under the right leadership. Under his leadership, his first ally came through circumstance rather than choice. The Death Watch, a group of Mandalorian warriors who rejected the pacifist ways of Duchess Satine's new Mandalorians, had been operating from the shadows of their moon Concordia. Led by Pre Vizsla, they dreamed of restoring Mandalore's warrior culture. When Maul and Savage Opress's escape pod crashed on a Death Watch-controlled planet, they found themselves rescued but imprisoned. Vizsla saw potential in these force-wielding warriors, but he was no fool either. He kept them contained until he could determine their usefulness. Maul proposed an alliance. Together, they would conquer Mandalore. Maul would help Vizsla overthrow Duchess Satine and restore the warrior ways. In exchange, Vizsla would provide Maul with his first military force and a foothold in the galactic community. But to truly challenge Satine's government, they would need more than just Mandalorian warriors. They would need the backing of the underworld's most powerful organizations. Maul intended to recruit them all. The recruitment of the Pike Syndicate came first. The Pikes controlled the spice trade from their homeworld of Obadiah, a lucrative empire built on addiction and desperation. Maul approached them with a simple proposition: join him, or be destroyed by his combined might. The Pike leadership, pragmatic above all else, recognized the value in Maul's offer. They brought their resources and their spice operations into the fold, adding economic power to Maul's growing coalition. Black Sun presented a different challenge. One of the galaxy's oldest and most established criminal organizations, they would not bow to threats alone. Maul took a more direct approach. He and Savage stormed into a meeting of Black Sun's leadership council. When they refused his offer, Maul demonstrated the consequences of defiance. The Sith warrior moved through the council chamber like a vengeful spirit. His double-bladed lightsaber painted crimson arcs through the air as he cut down every leader who dared oppose him. When the slaughter ended, only one survived. Zaiton Moj, who Maul appointed as the new leader of Black Sun, understood perfectly what was expected of him. The lesson was clear across the underworld. Join Maul's coalition or die. The final peace came with the Hutt clans. The massive slug-like crime lords controlled vast territories and resources, but they were notoriously difficult to intimidate. Their power and influence stretched back centuries. They feared no one. Maul traveled to Nal Hutta, the Hutt homeworld, with Savage and Vizsla at his side. The Hutt Grand Council met with them, but negotiations quickly broke down. Jabba the Hutt, perhaps the most powerful of all Hutts, sent bounty hunters to eliminate the intruders. The ensuing battle demonstrated Maul's tactical brilliance and raw power. He and his companions fought off waves of experienced bounty hunters, turning the Hutt palace into a war zone. In the chaos, Savage captured one of the council members, the ancient Hutt named Oruba. What followed was a brutal lesson in consequences. On Tatooine, Maul confronted Jabba himself with Oruba as a hostage. The message was simple: join the collective, or watch as Maul systematically destroyed every Hutt who refused. Faced with this threat, even mighty Jabba bowed to practicality. The Hutts joined Maul's coalition. With these four major organizations united under his banner, Maul gave his coalition a name: the Shadow Collective, a fitting title for an alliance built in darkness, designed to operate from the shadows, united by the singular vision of a fallen Sith Lord. The Shadow Collective represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had so many criminal organizations worked in concert toward a unified goal. The Death Watch provided military might and warrior discipline. The Pikes controlled the spice trade and economic leverage. Black Sun offered established criminal networks and connections. The Hutts brought vast resources and territorial control. Together, they formed a power block that rivaled legitimate governments in influence and capability. Maul trained them, organized them, and prepared them for the next phase of his plan. They would need to prove themselves. They would need to show the galaxy what the Shadow Collective could accomplish. They would need a target that would announce their presence unmistakably. That target would be Mandalore itself. The conquest of Mandalore. The plan to seize Mandalore was elegant in its simplicity, ruthless in its execution. Maul understood psychology and manipulation as well as he understood combat. He would not simply invade Mandalore. He would make the people welcome his invasion. Duchess Satine Kryze had ruled Mandalore for years, transforming the warrior planet into a bastion of peace and neutrality. Under her leadership, Mandalore had rejected violence, embraced diplomacy, and remained carefully distant from the Clone Wars consuming the galaxy. Many Mandalorians supported this transformation. They had seen enough war, enough death. Peace brought prosperity and security, but others remembered the old ways. They saw pacifism as weakness. They believed Mandalore's warrior heritage was being systematically erased. The Death Watch gave voice to these dissatisfactions, but they lacked the power to overthrow Satine's government. Until now, the Shadow Collective launched coordinated attacks across Mandalore's capital city of Sundari, not to conquer, but to terrorize. Black Sun gangsters, pike enforcers and hired thugs swept through the streets, creating chaos and destruction. Citizens who had lived in peace for years suddenly found themselves under siege in their own city. The attacks were brutal and seemingly random. Markets were destroyed. Civilians were attacked. Fear spread like a plague through Sundari's gleaming corridors. Duchess Satin's security forces responded, but they were peacekeepers, not warriors. They had been trained for policing, not warfare. Against the organized brutality of the Shadow Collective's assault, they were overwhelmed. As the violence reached its crescendo, as citizens cowered in their homes, wondering when the terror would end, salvation appeared. Death Watch warriors, armed and armored in traditional Mandalorian war gear, swept into the city. They engaged the attackers with decisive force, driving them back, protecting civilians, restoring order. To the frightened people of Sundari, the Death Watch were heroes. The warriors they had been taught to fear had saved them when their own pacifist government could not. This was exactly as Maul had planned. The grateful citizens welcomed Death Watch as liberators. Pre Vizsla, their leader, was hailed as Mandalore's savior. In the aftermath of the crisis, with fear still fresh and faith in Satin's government shattered, the people supported a change in leadership. Vizsla arrested Duchess Satine for her failure to protect Mandalore. Prime Minister Almec, secretly a Death Watch collaborator, supported the transition of power. In a matter of days, control of Mandalore shifted from the pacifist New Mandalorians to the warrior traditionalists of Death Watch. The conquest had been achieved without a single Death Watch warrior dying in battle against Mandalorian security. Maul's manipulation had accomplished what years of insurgency could not. But Maul had never intended for Pre Vizsla to truly rule Mandalore. With the planet secured, Vizsla's usefulness ended. The Mandalorian leader had served his purpose. He had provided the military force needed to execute the plan, had given the operation legitimacy in Mandalorian eyes. But Maul had no intention of serving as second to anyone. When Vizsla realized Maul expected control of Mandalore for himself, the fragile alliance shattered. The Mandalorian warrior challenged the Sith to single combat for leadership, invoking the ancient traditions of their people. Trial by combat, the oldest Mandalorian law. The winner would lead, the loser would die. The duel took place in the throne room before assembled Death Watch warriors. Vizsla fought with the Darksaber, an ancient weapon symbolic of Mandalorian leadership, and every ounce of his considerable skill. He was a warrior born and bred, trained from childhood in combat. But Maul was Sith. The fight was brutal and brief. Maul's superior connection to the Force, his decades of training under Darth Sidious, his raw power and speed, overwhelmed Vizsla's skill. When it ended, the Darksaber lay on the floor, and Pre Vizsla's head rolled beside it. Maul claimed the Darksaber and threw it, leadership of Death Watch by right of conquest. Most of the warriors accepted this. They valued strength above all else, and Maul had proven himself the stronger warrior, but not all accepted a non-Mandalorian ruler. Bo-Katan Kryze, Satine's sister and a Death Watch lieutenant, refused to bow to Maul. She led a group of warriors called the Night Owls in rebellion, fleeing the palace to wage guerrilla war against Maul's regime. Maul paid little attention to this schism. He had what he wanted. He controlled Mandalore. He controlled the Shadow Collective. He had a base of power from which to build his empire and threaten his former master. Those loyal to Maul repainted their armor in his colors, red and black, the colors of his own appearance, the colors that would come to define his most personal criminal enterprise. These warriors became known as Mandalorian Super Commandos, elite fighters absolutely loyal to the Sith Lord, who had conquered them, with Prime Minister Almec serving as his public face. Maul ruled Mandalore from the shadows. The planet's neutrality in the Clone Wars made it an ideal base of operations. Neither the Republic nor the Separatists would interfere with Mandalore's internal affairs, giving Maul freedom to operate without immediate external pressure. From this position of power, Maul believed he could finally threaten Darth Sidious. He had resources, armies, territory, and support. He had everything he needed to become a true rival to the Sith Master, who had discarded him. But Maul had underestimated his former master's awareness, and he had underestimated what Sidious would do to eliminate a threat to his grand design. Sidious strikes back. News of Maul's conquest reached Coruscant quickly. In the halls of the Republic Senate, Senator Palpatine listened to reports of Mandalore's change in government with seeming concern. He advocated for non-interference, arguing that Mandalore's neutrality meant the Republic had no right to intervene in their internal politics. But in the darkness of his private chambers, Darth Sidious felt something entirely different. His apprentice, the one he had presumed dead for over a decade, had returned. More than that, he had built an army, had seized a planet, had dared to create his own empire. This could not stand. Sidious had spent decades orchestrating the Clone Wars, manipulating both sides of the conflict to gradually seize control of the entire galaxy. His plan required precision, patience, and absolute control of all variables. Maul represented chaos, an unpredictable element that could derail everything. More personally, Maul's very existence was an insult. Sidious had trained him, raised him, shaped him into a weapon. When that weapon had been broken, Sidious had simply acquired a new one. The rule of two demanded it. There could only be two Sith, master and apprentice. Maul's survival and return threatened this fundamental truth. Sidious traveled to Mandalore personally, not as Senator Palpatine, but as Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith. When he arrived in the throne room of Sundari's royal palace, Maul finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He had thought himself ready to challenge Sidious. He had built armies, conquered a planet, unified criminal empires. In his mind, he had become powerful enough to stand as an equal to his former master. The duel that followed revealed the truth. Maul and Savage Opress, two powerful dark side warriors, attacked Sidious together. The Sith Master barely seemed to exert himself as he dismantled their offense. His lightsabers moved like living extensions of his will, guided by decades of mastery that made Maul's skills seem crude by comparison. Savage fell first. Sidious impaled him with both lightsabers, ending the Night Brother's life with casual efficiency. Then he turned his full attention to Maul. The former apprentice was beaten, humiliated, broken down until he knelt helpless before his master. Sidious could have killed him, perhaps should have killed him, but the Sith Lord had other plans. He needed Maul alive. The former apprentice's mother, Mother Talzin, remained a threat that Sidious wanted to eliminate. Talzin had evaded him for too long, and Maul would serve as bait to draw her out. Beyond that, Sidious wanted Maul to suffer, to understand fully the consequences of defiance. Death would be mercy. Continued existence as a broken tool would be punishment. Sidious had Maul imprisoned in the spire on Stygian Prime, a separatist prison planet. There, under the oversight of Count Dooku, Maul was systematically tortured. Every day brought fresh pain, fresh humiliation, fresh reminders of his complete and utter failure. The Shadow Collective fractured in the aftermath of Sidious's intervention. Without Maul's leadership, the carefully balanced coalition began to crumble. The different organizations had never truly trusted each other. They had united under Maul's power and vision. With him imprisoned and apparently broken, old rivalries and competitions resurfaced. But Maul had planned for this possibility. Before his final confrontation with Sidious, he had given specific instructions to his most trusted subordinates. If he fell, they were to go into hiding, to preserve what they could of the collective, to wait. Among those who received these instructions was a man who would carry Maul's vision forward in an unexpected way. A lieutenant who understood the value of patience, of working from the shadows, of building power quietly while others fought openly. His name was Dryden Voss. The Hidden Years. The Clone Wars entered its final phase, with the Shadow Collective apparently destroyed. The Republic invaded Mandalore, overthrowing Maul's regime and capturing the Sith Lord during the siege of Mandalore. Prime Minister Almec was killed. The Mandalorian super commandos were scattered or captured. Mandalore's brief flirtation with returning to its warrior ways ended in occupation. But as the Clone Wars concluded and the Republic transformed into the Galactic Empire, the seeds Maul had planted began to grow in unexpected soil. Dryden Voss had been rising through the criminal underworld for years, before the Shadow Collective's formation. A near-human with distinctive facial scarring that darkened when angered, Voss had built a reputation as a sophisticated, cultured criminal who could transition from charming host to ruthless killer in an instant. During the Clone Wars, Voss had proven himself valuable to Maul's operations. He understood the economics of crime, the importance of appearances, and how to operate a criminal enterprise that looked legitimate on the surface, while trafficking in everything from weapons to slaves beneath. When Maul ordered his Shadow Collective lieutenants to go into hiding, Voss took those instructions seriously. He understood that the Republic was transforming, that Palpatine was consolidating power, that the galaxy was entering a new era. In such times, those who adapted would survive. Those who fought openly would be destroyed. Voss gathered what remained of Maul's most loyal followers. Not the warriors or the Force users, but the criminals. The smugglers, the dealers, the fixers and enforcers who made the Shadow Collective's operations function. These were people who understood how to work in the shadows, how to profit from chaos, how to survive regime changes. From these remnants, something new began to take shape. The name came from Maul himself, though in a way the Sith Lord had never anticipated. Maul's appearance, his red skin and dark markings, his very presence, had always evoked images of blood and dawn. His most loyal followers had worn his colors, when those followers needed to identify themselves to each other in the dangerous years after the Shadow Collective's fall. They used a simple phrase: await the dawn. Not a violent sunrise, but something subtler, crimson like blood, like Maul's lightsaber, like the color of power operating from the shadows. Crimson Dawn. What began as a code phrase evolved into an identity. As the Galactic Empire rose and began crushing obvious criminal organizations, Crimson Dawn learned to be less obvious. They operated through legitimate businesses. They cultivated relationships with imperial officials. They provided services the Empire officially condemned, but unofficially required. Voss proved instrumental in this evolution. He understood that the Empire's order-obsessed bureaucracy created opportunities for those willing to operate in the gaps. The Empire wanted control, but control required resources, information, and capabilities they didn't always possess. Crimson Dawn could provide those things, for a price. The organization built networks across multiple worlds. They trafficked in coaxium, the rare hyperfuel that powered faster-than-light travel. They moved weapons, slaves, spice, and information. They laundered credits through legitimate businesses and corrupted imperial officials through careful applications of bribes and blackmail. Unlike the flashy, violent criminal organizations that drew imperial attention and subsequent destruction, Crimson Dawn cultivated sophistication. They were the criminals who attended high society functions, who traded in art and antiquities, who moved in circles where outright violence would be gauche. Voss embodied this approach perfectly. His luxury yacht, the First Light, became a mobile headquarters where he could conduct business while maintaining plausible deniability. The ship was fitted with every luxury, filled with priceless artifacts, and served as a demonstration of Crimson Dawn's success and sophistication. But beneath the elegant surface, the violence remained. Voss was trained in teres kesi, a martial art specifically designed to combat force wielders. When charm and money failed, he could kill with brutal efficiency. His twin Pater blades, elegant weapons that crackled with energy, could carve through opponents who believed. His refined manners indicated weakness. Crimson Dawn's symbol evolved during this period. A stylized sunrise in crimson, representing the new day dawning for their organization. Some said it also represented Maul himself, the red sun of his rage, rising over a galaxy that had tried to bury him, because Maul was not dead. The former Sith Lord had escaped from his imprisonment during the chaos of Order 66 and the Empire's rise. He had evaded both Jedi and Inquisitors, had survived when so many Force sensitives were hunted down and destroyed. And though he remained hidden, though he operated from the deepest shadows, he never forgot about Crimson Dawn. In fact, he had been guiding it all along. The Hidden Master, Dryden Voss, ruled Crimson Dawn in name and in practice, but he answered to another. Few within the organization knew this. Even fewer knew the identity of Voss's mysterious master. It was better that way, safer. Maul had learned from his confrontation with Sidious. He had learned that open ambition drew dangerous attention, that building obvious power structures made you a target, that true control came from working through others, from remaining unknown, from pulling strings that no one else could see. So while Voss served as Crimson Dawn's public face, attending society functions and conducting high-level negotiations, Maul remained a shadow behind the shadow. He communicated through encrypted hologram transmissions. He gave orders that Voss implemented without question. He shaped Crimson Dawn's strategy from complete darkness. This arrangement served both parties well. Voss gained the protection and guidance of a being who understood the Force, who had connections and knowledge far beyond what any normal criminal could possess. Maul gained an empire that no one knew he controlled, a network of resources and influence that the Empire's inquisitors would never think to associate with the supposedly dead Sith Lord. Maul's influence shaped Crimson Dawn in subtle ways. The organization became ruthless in its efficiency, showing no mercy to traitors or competitors. They understood power and how to project it. They valued strength and punished weakness. These were Sith principles, filtering down through Voss's leadership into the organization's culture. But Crimson Dawn was not simply a criminal organization. It was Maul's insurance policy, his backup plan, his weapon in the shadows. While he remained in hiding from the Empire, from the Inquisitors, from Vader and Sidious themselves, Crimson Dawn grew stronger. The organization established footholds across the galaxy. They had operations on Corellia, where they recruited from the desperate masses in that shipbuilding world's slums. They controlled smuggling routes through the Outer Rim. They had connections with other criminal organizations, including maintaining a fragile alliance with the Pike Syndicate that dated back to the Shadow Collective days. One of their most valuable resources was information. Crimson Dawn operatives gathered intelligence on the Empire, on rival criminal organizations, on valuable targets and opportunities. This information fed up through layers of command until it reached Voss, and from Voss to Maul himself. Through these information networks, Maul tracked what was happening in the galaxy. He learned of Vader's rise, understanding immediately that his former rival Anakin Skywalker had become Sidious's new apprentice. He monitored the Empire's expansion, watching his former master's grand plan unfold. He waited, and he planned, and he built his strength. The organization also served as a recruiting ground. Voss had carte blanche to bring talented individuals into Crimson Dawn's ranks. Those who proved themselves valuable, who demonstrated the right combination of skills and ruthlessness, might eventually come to Maul's personal attention. One such individual would ultimately change everything. On the industrial shipbuilding world of Corellia, millions lived in grinding poverty. They worked in factories, assembling the starships that carried the wealthy and powerful across the galaxy, while they themselves could barely afford food. For the desperate and ambitious, crime offered the only realistic path to escape. Among these desperate millions were the street children, orphans and runaways who survived through theft and guile, working for criminal gangs who controlled Corellia slums. They stole, they ran cons, they did whatever was necessary to survive another day. Two such children were Qi'ra and Han. Partners, friends, and perhaps something more. They dreamed of escaping Corellia together, of finding freedom among the stars, of leaving behind the grinding poverty and violence that defined their existence. Their opportunity came in the form of stolen coaxium. The valuable hyperfuel could buy them passage off-world if they could get it past the Imperial checkpoints. They ran for freedom together, desperate and hopeful. But fate had other plans. At the checkpoint, Imperial security caught Qi'ra while Han escaped. She screamed for him to go, to save himself. He promised to return for her. Then she was dragged away, and he was gone, and both their lives diverged onto paths neither could have imagined. Qi'ra found herself sold to Lady Proxima, the Grindelid crime boss who controlled the White Worm's gang. From Proxima she was sold again to Sarkin Eneb, and from Eneb she was sold one final time to Dryden Voss of Crimson Dawn. Voss saw something in the young woman beyond her obvious beauty. She had survived the streets of Corellia, had survived being passed between criminal bosses like property. That required intelligence, adaptability, and a core of steel that no amount of hardship could break. These were qualities Crimson Dawn valued. He branded her with Crimson Dawn's symbol, marking her as his property. On her forearm and neck, the crimson sunrise burned into her skin, a permanent reminder of who owned her loyalty now. She would serve Crimson Dawn for life. This was the price of her survival. But Voss offered her more than just survival. He offered her purpose, power, and the possibility of becoming something more than another criminal's possession. He trained her personally in Tereskasi, the same martial art he used. He educated her in the criminal underworld's politics and economics. He showed her how to move in high society, how to dress, how to speak, how to be sophisticated rather than obviously dangerous. Qi'ra proved an exceptional student. She absorbed everything Voss taught her with fierce determination. She understood that knowledge and skill were her only path to agency in this world, that if she could make herself valuable enough, she might eventually have some control over her own fate. Over 3 years, she rose through Crimson Dawn's ranks. She went from branded property to Voss's most trusted lieutenant. She handled delicate negotiations, oversaw important operations, and gradually became the face people associated with Crimson Dawn's sophisticated approach to crime. Voss trusted her with missions too important for lesser operatives. When Crimson Dawn needed someone who could move in high circles, who could be charming or deadly as circumstances required, they sent Qi'ra. She never failed. She never let personal feelings interfere with operations. She had learned the first and most important rule of survival: loyalty to Crimson Dawn above all else. But despite her success, despite her position, Qi'ra never forgot Han. She never forgot the boy who had escaped Corellia while she had been left behind. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she wondered what had become of him, whether he had found the freedom they had dreamed about, whether he ever thought about her. She would learn the answer sooner than she expected. And when that reunion came, it would set in motion events that would transform Crimson Dawn from a successful criminal syndicate into something far more ambitious, something far more dangerous, because Dryden Voss's tenure as Crimson Dawn's leader was about to end. And in the aftermath, Qi'ra would discover the true identity of the mysterious master her boss had served. She would meet the former Sith Lord who had founded the Shadow Collective. She would learn secrets about the Empire that would change her understanding of the entire galaxy. Most importantly, she would inherit control of Crimson Dawn itself. The stage was set. The players were moving into position, and the next phase of Crimson Dawn's history was about to begin with the heist that should have been simple, but would instead trigger a cascade of events leading to betrayal, revelation, and transformation, all because of a simple job to steal refined coaxium from an Imperial convoy on the planet Vandor. Tobias Beckett was a professional. In a galaxy full of amateurs who called themselves smugglers and thieves, he stood apart through skill, experience, and a ruthless pragmatism that kept him alive where others died. He worked for Crimson Dawn because they paid well, and because refusing their contracts was an excellent way to end up dead. His latest job seemed straightforward enough. Steal a shipment of refined coaxium from an Imperial convoy on the mountainous planet of Vandor. The operation required precision, but Beckett had done similar work dozens of times. He assembled his crew, his wife Val, an explosives expert, Rio Durant, a multi-armed alien pilot with steady nerves, and 2 newcomers he had reluctantly recruited, a Wookiee called Chewbacca and a cocky young smuggler who called himself Han Solo. The plan unraveled within minutes of execution. The convoy ran on an elevated magnetic railway through Vandor's mountains. Beckett's crew would attach to the train, breach the cargo compartments, steal the coaxium, and escape before Imperial reinforcements arrived. Simple, direct, professional. They had not accounted for the marauders led by Enfys Nest. The Cloud Riders attacked the train simultaneously with Beckett's crew, turning the heist into a 3-way battle. In the chaos, Beckett was forced to make impossible choices. Val sacrificed herself to destroy a bridge and stop Imperial reinforcements, dying in the explosion she triggered. Rio Durant was killed by a Cloud Rider's blast. The refined coaxium was lost when Beckett had to jettison it to avoid a catastrophic explosion. What should have been a profitable heist became a complete disaster. Beckett's crew was decimated. The cargo was destroyed, and he would have to report this failure to Dryden Voss personally. Beckett understood what failure meant when dealing with Crimson Dawn. Voss had a reputation for sophistication and culture, but he also had a reputation for absolute ruthlessness toward those who disappointed him. Men who failed Dryden Voss tended to die badly. But Beckett was a survivor. If he arrived empty-handed, Voss would kill him. Therefore, he needed to arrive with a plan, a solution, something that would keep him alive long enough to make good on his failure. Han Solo, despite his inexperience, proved surprisingly resourceful in this regard. The young smuggler proposed an alternative. If they couldn't deliver the coaxium they had promised, they would steal unrefined coaxium directly from the mines of Kessel. It was dangerous, nearly impossible, but if they succeeded, Crimson Dawn would profit more than they would have from the original cargo. It was just crazy enough to work. More importantly, it was just convincing enough to present to Voss without getting immediately killed. Beckett, Solo, and Chewbacca traveled to meet Dryden Voss aboard the First Light. The yacht was docked at the shipyards of Vandor 1, gleaming white against the industrial backdrop. Stepping aboard was like entering a different galaxy entirely. Plush carpets, priceless art, subtle lighting that spoke of wealth and refinement. This was how the galaxy's elite lived, and Crimson Dawn had positioned themselves among that elite. Voss was hosting a party when they arrived. The wealthy and powerful of several systems mingled in the First Light's grand salon, attended by servants and entertained by exotic performers. It was the kind of gathering where fortunes changed hands over drinks, where alliances were forged and broken with handshakes, where the real business of the galaxy was conducted away from official channels. Beckett's arrival created a disruption in the refined atmosphere. He came not as a guest, but as a servant reporting failure. Voss excused himself from his guests and led Beckett, Han, and Chewie to his private study. The study was filled with artifacts, scythe relics, Jedi holocrons, ancient weapons, and cultural treasures from across the galaxy. Voss collected such items obsessively, decorating his personal space with the stolen heritage of 1,000 civilizations. Among the collection was a particularly valuable piece, a slab of obsidian stone plundered from a Sith temple, polished to a dark mirror finish. Voss's face underwent a disturbing transformation as Beckett explained what had happened on Vandor. The sophisticated, charming host disappeared. In his place emerged the killer, the enforcer, the man whose scars darkened visibly as his rage built. He did not need to threaten directly. His very presence made the threat clear. Then, Qi'ra entered the study. For Han Solo, the moment was impossible. The girl from Corellia, his partner, his friend, his first love, the person he had left behind 3 years ago with a promise to return. She stood before him now in expensive clothes, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged in these circles, serving as Dryden Voss's most trusted lieutenant. Their reunion was observed closely by Voss, who noted the recognition between them with interest. Qi'ra maintained her composure perfectly, greeting Han as an old acquaintance rather than as someone she had once loved. She understood the danger of showing weakness, of giving Voss anything he might use against her. It was Qi'ra who ultimately saved them. When Voss prepared to kill Beckett for his failure, when the situation seemed beyond salvation, she intervened. She convinced Voss that Solo's plan, desperate as it was, represented their best chance to recover their losses. She volunteered to accompany the crew to Kessel, to oversee the operation personally and ensure its success. Voss agreed, but with conditions. The crew would be given one chance. If they failed again, if they returned without the calcium, they would all die. Beckett, Solo, Chewbacca, and Qi'ra herself. No second chances, no excuses. As they left the study, Han tried to speak with Qi'ra, to understand what had happened to her in the years since Corellia. She shut down those attempts. They had work to do. Personal feelings would have to wait until they survived. What came next? The Kessel job would require a ship, a crew, and connections in places most people avoided. It would take them into the heart of the spice mining operation, into one of the galaxy's most notorious criminal enterprises, and ultimately into a desperate run through one of the most dangerous regions of space. But more importantly, it would create the circumstances that would lead to Dryden Voss's death and the revelation of Crimson Dawn's true master. The Kessel Run. Kessel was a nightmare world turned profitable through brutality and slavery. The planet's spice mines produced the raw material for countless addictive substances, worked by enslaved beings who rarely survived more than a few years in the toxic environment. The Pike Syndicate controlled these operations, running them with mechanical efficiency and complete disregard for life. To steal unrefined coaxium from Kessel required more than just breaking in. They needed to look like legitimate buyers, needed to gain access to the mines themselves, needed to avoid triggering the Pike security response until they were ready to escape. It was the kind of operation that required careful planning and expert execution. Naturally, Han Solo improvised most of it. They acquired a ship, the Millennium Falcon, from a smuggler and gambler named Lando Calrissian. The ship would prove instrumental to their success, though none of them knew it yet. They posed as buyers interested in purchasing slaves, which gave them access to the mining operation. Once inside, they initiated a slave rebellion to create chaos, while they stole the coaxium. The escape was where things got complicated. Unrefined coaxium was incredibly unstable. It could explode at any moment, especially if exposed to the wrong conditions. The Falcon's cargo hold became a ticking time bomb as they loaded canisters of the volatile fuel. They had perhaps hours before the whole shipment detonated and vaporized them all. The only way back to Voss in time was through the Kessel Run, a hyperspace route that threaded between gravitational anomalies, debris fields, and the massive Maul cluster of black holes. Ships attempting the run had to navigate by sight and instinct, making split-second decisions at speeds where a single error meant death. Most pilots took around 18 parsecs to complete the route. Han, with some creative navigation and a lot of luck, did it in 12. They survived, barely. The Falcon sustained significant damage. Several crew members died, including Lando's droid co-pilot, L-337, but they had the coaxium, refined through the dangers of the run itself. Against all odds, they had succeeded where most would have failed. They should have felt triumphant. Instead, as they approached their rendezvous with Voss, new complications emerged. Enfy's Nest and the Cloud Riders had tracked them. The Marauder leader wanted the coaxium for herself, or so it seemed. More importantly, Tobias Beckett revealed his true nature. He had been playing both sides, reporting to Voss about Han and Qi'ra's interactions, preparing to betray them if necessary, to save himself. The rendezvous took place on Savareen, a desert world where Crimson Dawn maintained an outpost. Voss waited there with his enforcers, ready to take delivery of the coaxium and settle accounts with his operatives. What he didn't know was that multiple betrayals were about to collide in ways none of the participants expected. Betrayals and revelations. The desert wind swept across Savareen's landing platform as three groups converged on the coaxium. Dryden Voss and his Crimson Dawn enforcers, Han Solo and his crew, and Enfy's Nest with her Cloud Riders. Voss arrived in style, his refined appearance unmarred by the harsh environment. He greeted them warmly, as if they were guests at one of his parties, rather than criminals conducting an illegal transaction. But beneath the charm, everyone present understood the danger. This was where accounts would be settled, where the success or failure of the Kaisel operation would be judged. Han attempted one final con. He presented Voss with a case of coaxium, genuine product that would pass any inspection, but he informed Beckett privately that the shipment was fake, expecting Voss would discover this and kill them all. What Han didn't know was that Beckett had already betrayed him to Voss, warning the crime boss about potential deception. The betrayals cascaded in rapid succession. Voss revealed that Beckett had warned him about Han's planned double-cross. Beckett admitted he valued his own survival over any loyalty to the crew. Qi'ra, caught between the man she had once loved and the organization that owned her loyalty, had to make an impossible choice. Then Enfys Nest revealed the truth that changed everything. The Cloud Riders were not common marauders. They were rebels, fighting against the Empire's oppression. Enfys Nest, far younger than anyone had suspected beneath her intimidating armor, explained that they had been stealing from criminal organizations that collaborated with the Empire, organizations like Crimson Dawn. The coaxium wasn't just valuable, it was necessary for the brewing rebellion. With it, they could fund operations, build ships, mount resistance against imperial tyranny. They weren't trying to profit from the fuel. They were trying to use it to fight for freedom. This revelation hit Qi'ra and Han differently. For Han, who had spent his life looking out for himself, it presented an unexpected opportunity for something more meaningful. For Qi'ra, it represented a complication in a situation already spiraling beyond her control. Voss, however, was focused on the immediate problem. He had been deceived, or thought he had been. His rage built as the situation deteriorated. He would kill them all, take the coaxium, and deliver it to his superiors in the Empire, or sell it to the highest bidder. The rebellion meant nothing to him. Only profit and power mattered. The confrontation turned violent. Voss attacked Han personally, demonstrating his Terraskesi training. Despite Han's skill with a blaster, Voss's martial arts training gave him the advantage in close combat. He disarmed Han, beat him down, and prepared to kill him. Qi'ra intervened, but not how anyone expected. She attacked Voss. The duel between former master and student was brief, but brutal. Qi'ra had been trained by Voss himself in the same fighting style he used. She knew his techniques, his preferences, his patterns. But more than that, she had been waiting for this opportunity, waiting for the moment when she could strike at the man who had branded her, owned her, controlled her life for 3 years. Their Terraskesi duel ranged across Voss's study. Energy blades clashed, bodies moved with lethal precision. Voss was more experienced, but Qi'ra was younger, faster, and fueled by years of suppressed rage. She had learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment. This was that moment. When it ended, Voss lay dying on the floor of his study, run through by Qi'ra's blade. She stood over him, breathing hard, knowing she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Outside, Beckett had stolen the coaxium and fled. Han pursued him, leading to a final confrontation between the mentor and student. Beckett admitted he had taught Han well, perhaps too well. Then Han shot him, choosing to protect the coaxium and the rebellion over trusting the man who had repeatedly betrayed him. When Han returned to the yacht, ready to flee with Qi'ra, to finally escape together as they had always planned, she made a different choice. She sealed the study behind him, trapping him outside. Through the door she could hear him calling her name, asking her to come with him. She didn't respond. Instead, she did something that would change the course of her entire life. She used Voss's ring, the signet ring that identified him as Crimson Dawn's leader, to activate a holoprojector. The shadow behind the throne, the hologram that materialized above Voss's desk, showed a figure that should have been impossible. A Zabrak with horned head and red skin bisected by dark markings. Yellow eyes that burned with rage and intelligence. A being who had been cut in half on Naboo decades ago, who should have been dead a dozen times over. Darth Maul. Qi'ra had suspected Voss answered to someone, but she had never imagined this. The former Sith Lord, the warrior who had trained under Darth Sidious himself, the founder of the Shadow Collective, spoke to her directly. He asked about Voss. She reported that her former master was dead, killed in the course of the Kessel operation's aftermath. Maul's response was not anger, but opportunity. He instructed Qi'ra to bring the first light to Dathomir, his homeworld. There they would discuss her future and Crimson Dawn's direction. The implication was clear. Voss's position was opened, and Qi'ra, having proven herself capable of killing her predecessor, was being offered his role. She agreed without hesitation. When she emerged from the study, Han waited for her. He still believed they would leave together, would finally escape as they had planned on Corellia. He had the coaxium for the rebellion. They had survived. Freedom was finally within reach. Qi'ra disabused him of these notions gently but firmly. She couldn't go with him. She had responsibilities now, had made choices that committed her to a different path. Han deserved better than the life she was about to lead. He deserved to be the hero she had seen glimpses of during this operation. She kissed him one final time. Then she walked away, boarding the first light and leaving Han Solo behind, just as she had been left behind on Corellia 3 years earlier. But this time, she was leaving by choice. She was walking toward power, toward purpose, toward an opportunity to become something more than Dryden Voss's branded property. She was walking toward Darth Maul, and whatever that encounter would bring. The first light departed Savareen, with Qi'ra at its helm. Behind her, she left Han Solo, who would give the coaxium to Enfys Nest and the rebellion, who would continue his career as a smuggler, who would eventually meet a farm boy from Tatooine and get drawn into events that would reshape the galaxy. But Qi'ra's path led elsewhere, to Dathomir, the planet of the Night Sisters, to a meeting with the fallen Sith Lord, who saw in her something he could use, to a transformation from lieutenant to leader. Crimson Dawn's next chapter was about to begin, and this time Qi'ra would write it herself. Meeting the Master Dathomir hung in space like a diseased eye, its ochre surface roiling with toxic mists and dark side energy. This was a world of witches and warriors, of ancient magics and older hatreds. The Night Sisters had called this place home for millennia, practicing dark rituals and commanding the male Night Brothers who served them. It was also where Maul had been born, where Mother Talzin had ruled, where his brother Savage Opress had been transformed into a warrior through dark magic. Though the Night Sisters were gone now, destroyed by the Separatists during the Clone Wars, the planet retained its sinister character. The first light descended through Dathomir's atmosphere, guided by coordinates Maul had provided. Qi'ra had spent the journey preparing herself, trying to anticipate what would come next. She knew of the Sith through Voss's collection of artifacts and the stories whispered in criminal circles. She knew that Maul had once been Sidious's apprentice, had been cut in half by a Jedi, and somehow survived, had founded the Shadow Collective, and been defeated by Sidious himself. But knowing facts was different from understanding what it meant to stand before such a being. Maul waited for her in the ruins of a Night Sister fortress. The structure was mostly collapsed, reclaimed by the hostile jungle that covered much of Dathomir's surface. But Maul had made it his sanctuary, his hiding place from the Empire and from his former master's attention. He appeared before her supported by his cybernetic legs, those mechanical limbs a constant reminder of what Obi-Wan Kenobi had taken from him. His presence radiated power and menace, yet he regarded Qi'ra with something like interest rather than hostility. She had proven herself by killing Voss. That demonstration of capability had earned his attention. Now he would determine if she deserved more. Maul spoke to her about Crimson Dawn's origins, about how it had evolved from the Shadow Collective's remnants. He explained that Voss had been competent but limited, useful as a face for the organization, but lacking the vision to make Crimson Dawn something greater. The syndicate had been successful under Voss's leadership, but success was not enough. Maul wanted transformation. He revealed truths about the galaxy that Qi'ra had never known. That the Emperor Palpatine himself was the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. That the Empire was built on dark side power. That the Sith had won, had conquered the entire galaxy while hiding in plain sight. That everything people believed about their government was a lie. For Qi'ra, these revelations recontextualized her entire existence. The empire she had lived under, had worked around, had seen as just another power structure to navigate, was actually the culmination of an ancient Sith plot. The oppression, the slavery, the grinding poverty that had defined her youth on Corellia, all of it stemmed from this fundamental corruption at the heart of galactic civilization. Maul offered her a choice. She could walk away, could take the first light and disappear, could try to build a normal life somewhere far from Crimson Dawn and Sith and rebellions. Or she could stay, could take Voss's place, could help Maul build Crimson Dawn into something powerful enough to threaten the Sith themselves. It was not really a choice at all. Qi'ra had never been one to walk away from power, from opportunity, from the chance to control her own destiny, rather than be controlled by others. She accepted. Maul began her training immediately, not in the Force itself, for Qi'ra was not Force sensitive, but in everything else a leader of Crimson Dawn would need. He taught her about the criminal underworld's true structure, about the 5 syndicates that controlled most organized crime in the galaxy. He explained how to manipulate these organizations, how to play them against each other, how to build power through information and leverage rather than obvious force. He continued her martial training, expanding on what Voss had taught her. Terrace Cassie was good, but Maul showed her techniques and approaches that Voss had never known. He taught her to fight Force users, to exploit their reliance on the Force against them. The training was brutal, punishing, designed to forge her into a more effective weapon. Most importantly, he taught her to think strategically, to see the galaxy as a board game where every piece could be moved, every player could be manipulated, every outcome could be influenced through the right applications of pressure and incentive. Qi'ra absorbed it all with fierce determination. She had spent 3 years as Voss's lieutenant, always serving, always following orders. Now she was being prepared to give those orders herself, to lead Crimson Dawn not as someone's property, but as its acknowledged ruler. But Maul made one thing clear: ultimate control would remain his. He would stay hidden, would continue operating from the shadows as he had during Voss's tenure. Qi'ra would be the face, the leader in all but name. When she needed guidance, he would provide it. When critical decisions needed to be made, he would make them. For now, this arrangement suited Qi'ra. She was learning, growing, preparing herself for the role ahead. Maul's knowledge and experience were resources she could not match. His understanding of the Sith, of the Empire, of galactic scale manipulation, these were things she needed to absorb before she could truly lead independently. The training lasted months. During this time, Crimson Dawn continued operating under automated protocols Voss had established. The organization was sophisticated enough to function without constant leadership, at least temporarily. When Qi'ra finally returned to take command, she would do so with knowledge and capabilities that far exceeded what Voss had possessed. But the galaxy was changing. The rebellion was growing stronger. The Empire was consolidating power, and unknown to Qi'ra, Maul's time was running out. The death of Maul. The former Sith Lord had spent years in hiding, evading the Empire's attention while building Crimson Dawn into a tool for eventual revenge against Sidious. But he had never stopped hunting for one final confrontation with the Jedi, who had cut him down all those years ago, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maul's obsession with Kenobi had defined much of his existence. The Jedi Master represented everything Maul hated about the Jedi, about the galaxy, about his own failures. Kenobi had defeated him in combat, had survived Maul's murder of his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, had helped overthrow Maul's regime on Mandalore, and now Kenobi was hiding somewhere in the Outer Rim, protecting something Maul desperately wanted to understand. Through manipulation and patience, Maul discovered Kenobi's location. The desert planet of Tatooine, worthless from any strategic perspective, but clearly important to the Jedi Master. Maul traveled there, driven by his need for closure, for one final confrontation with his nemesis. He found Kenobi in the desert, far from any settlement. The years had aged the Jedi Master, had weathered him like the endless sands, but his eyes still held the same determination, the same commitment to the light that Maul despised. Their duel was brief. Maul had prepared for this moment, had built up to it for years, but Kenobi had learned from their previous encounters. He had studied Maul's style, had understood the patterns, had anticipated the attack that would come. 3 strikes. That was all it took. Kenobi's lightsaber moved with perfect economy, redirecting Maul's assault and delivering a killing blow in a handful of heartbeats. As Maul lay dying in Kenobi's arms, his rage finally gave way to something else. Understanding, perhaps, or exhaustion. He asked about the person Kenobi was protecting, suddenly certain that this was why the Jedi had hidden here. Kenobi confirmed it. The Chosen One. The one who would ultimately bring balance to the Force. Maul's last words acknowledged this. He expressed hope that this Chosen One would avenge them both. Then Darth Maul, the former Sith apprentice who had survived death itself, finally passed beyond the possibility of return. News of Maul's death reached Qi'ra through their network of informants. She had been expecting him to contact her for their regular update when the information came through instead. The former Sith Lord was dead, killed in a duel with a Jedi on a backwater desert planet. She was alone now, truly alone, in a way she had never been since killing Voss. There was no hidden master to consult, no ancient Sith Lord to provide guidance. Crimson Dawn was hers to lead, without anyone looking over her shoulder. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Qi'ra understood immediately that this changed everything. Without Maul's knowledge and connections, she would need to rely entirely on her own capabilities. Without his hidden power supporting her decisions, she would succeed or fail based purely on her own merits. But she also inherited something invaluable. Everything Maul had known, he had shared with her during their time together. His understanding of the Sith, his knowledge of the criminal underworld, his strategic insights, all of it remained with her even if he was gone. More than that, she inherited his mission. Maul had spent his life seeking revenge against Sidious, building toward a confrontation with the Sith, who had discarded him. That purpose, that drive to challenge the dark side's dominion over the galaxy, became Qi'ra's purpose as well. Not because Maul ordered it, he was dead, beyond giving orders, but because in those months on Dathomir, Maul had shown her the truth about the galaxy, had opened her eyes to the fundamental corruption at the heart of the Empire. And having seen that truth, Qi'ra could not unsee it. She would continue what Maul had started, but she would do it her way. Reconstruction. The first thing Qi'ra did as Crimson Dawn's sole leader was disappear. The syndicate went dark, withdrawing from most of its obvious operations, seeming to fade from the galactic stage. Rivals and imperial authorities alike assumed the organization had crumbled after Voss's death and Maul's apparent abandonment. This was exactly what Qi'ra wanted them to think. While Crimson Dawn appeared to collapse, Qi'ra was actually reconstructing it from the ground up. She had learned from Maul's example. Obvious power drew attention. Visible operations invited interference. True power came from working through others, from controlling things no one knew you controlled. She began placing agents throughout the galaxy. Not obvious criminals, but people embedded in legitimate positions. Imperial officers who could be bribed or blackmailed. Corporate executives with access to resources and information. Low-level bureaucrats who could manipulate records and redirect shipments. These agents often didn't know they worked for Crimson Dawn. They thought they were dealing with independent contractors, with multiple smaller organizations, never realizing they all reported up to the same hidden master. Qi'ra also embedded agents within the major criminal organizations. Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, the Hutt Cartel, even the smaller syndicates like the Crimora and the Shiga clan. These infiltrators fed information back to Crimson Dawn, giving Qi'ra eyes and ears throughout the underworld. Perhaps most audaciously, she placed agents within the Rebel Alliance itself. The growing resistance movement was too important to ignore. They were fighting the Empire, which aligned with Qi'ra's ultimate goals, but they were also a potential resource, a force that could be guided, manipulated, used to create the chaos necessary for Qi'ra's larger plans. This infiltration strategy required patience and resources. It took years to properly embed operatives to ensure their cover identities would hold up under scrutiny, to build the networks of trust necessary for them to access valuable information. During this time, Qi'ra also sought out expertise she lacked. The most critical recruitment was someone she would come to call the archivist. The archivist had been known as Madeline Sun, a Sava, a teacher at the University of Barleth, who specialized in studying the Force. But the Empire had outlawed such study, had systematically destroyed any knowledge base that might produce new Jedi or threaten Sith dominance. Sun lost everything: her career, her work, her purpose. When Qi'ra found her, Sun was living in poverty, selling junk to survive, keeping a few dark side artifacts hidden as personal keepsakes. Imperial stormtroopers were searching her home, about to arrest her for possession of forbidden material. Qi'ra killed the stormtroopers and recruited Sun on the spot. She offered the former scholar something she desperately wanted: access to resources, to artifacts, to the ability to study the Force without Imperial interference. In exchange, Sun would serve as Crimson Dawn's expert on dark side lore, helping Qi'ra understand the Sith and potentially find ways to oppose them. Sun, who became known as the Archivist, accepted eagerly. Qi'ra showed her Crimson Dawn's collection of dark side artifacts, items inherited from Maul and Voss, things acquired through decades of criminal activity. For someone who had dedicated her life to studying the Force, it was an irreplaceable treasure. But more than artifacts, Qi'ra gave the Archivist access to information. Crimson Dawn's vast network of agents could pull data from across the galaxy. The Archivist could research anything, investigate any mystery, pursue any line of inquiry related to the Force and the Sith. Together, they began planning for the future, for the day when Crimson Dawn would emerge from the shadows and challenge the Empire itself. That day was coming, sooner than anyone expected, because Qi'ra had learned something critical, something that would enable her to announce Crimson Dawn's return in a way that would shake the entire galaxy. She learned that Han Solo had been captured by the Empire and frozen in carbonite, and she learned that the bounty hunter Boba Fett was transporting him to Jabba the Hutt on Tatooine. This presented an opportunity too perfect to ignore. Han's capture had drawn the attention of the Empire, the Rebellion, and the Hutt clan. Everyone wanted Solo for different reasons. His fate had become a nexus point where multiple galactic powers would collide. Qi'ra decided Crimson Dawn would take him first. This would be Crimson Dawn's grand announcement, the proof that the Syndicate had not died with Voss, but had instead been reborn stronger and more dangerous than ever. They would steal Han Solo from Boba Fett, the galaxy's most notorious bounty hunter. They would hold an auction for Solo, forcing the Empire, the Hutts, and the Rebellion to come to them. And in the chaos that followed, Qi'ra would begin the next phase of her plan, the phase that would ultimately lead to war between the Sith and Crimson Dawn. But first, she needed to recruit one final group of specialists, Force users who operated outside the Sith's direct control, warriors who understood the dark side but remained independent of Palpatine's dominion. She needed the Knights of Ren. In the shadows of the Empire's reign, when most Force-sensitive groups had been hunted to extinction, the Knights of Ren persisted. They were not Jedi, who served the light. They were not Sith, who mastered the dark. They were something else entirely. Warriors who followed what they called the Shadow, who wielded the dark side without pledging allegiance to Sidious's grand design. Their history stretched back far before the Empire, before even the Clone Wars. Whispers suggested they had once been powerful, perhaps rivaling the Sith themselves in influence and capability. But by the Imperial era, they had diminished, reduced to a small band operating on the fringes, scavenging for artifacts, recruiting sparingly, staying beneath the notice of more powerful organizations. Their leader, known simply as Ren, bore the title of the ancient lightsaber they wielded. The Knights operated by simple principles. They served the Shadow, they followed strength, and they answered to no one except the wielder of their sacred blade. Qi'ra had learned of them through the Archivist's research. Madeline Sun, in her studies of Force-sensitive groups, had uncovered references to the Knights, an old order that had survived by staying small, staying quiet, and avoiding the conflicts that consumed their contemporaries. They were perfect for Qi'ra's purposes. Finding them required patience and resources. The Knights moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough for authorities to track them. But Crimson Dawn's information network eventually located them on Varnak, a remote world in the Mid-Rim where they had been investigating rumors of ancient artifacts. Qi'ra traveled there personally with the archivist. This was too important to delegate. She needed Force users for what came next, and the Knights of Ren were the only option that didn't involve trying to recruit actual Sith or surviving Jedi, either of which would have been suicidal. The meeting took place in the ruins of an old fortress, stone walls crumbling under the weight of centuries. Ren waited for them, masked and imposing, his knights arrayed behind him in silent menace. They knew better than to trust anyone who sought them out. Most people who came looking for the knights wanted them dead or enslaved. Qi'ra made her pitch directly. She knew the knights feared the Sith. Every Force-sensitive group in the galaxy had reason to fear Sidious. The Emperor had spent years systematically eliminating anyone who might challenge Sith dominance. The Jedi were nearly extinct. The Night Sisters had been destroyed. Smaller Force cults had been hunted down and eliminated. The Knights of Ren had survived only because they remained small, hidden, seemingly insignificant. But Ren understood this was temporary. Eventually, Sidious would turn his attention to them. Eventually, they would face the choice between submission or extinction. Qi'ra offered a third option, alliance with Crimson Dawn. Together, they would challenge the Sith directly, would create the conditions necessary to destroy Sidious and Vader before the Sith could move against the Knights. She offered them everything they might want: glory, safety, resources, the freedom to operate as they wished without fearing Sith retribution, and perhaps most enticingly, access to artifacts and knowledge that Crimson Dawn had accumulated over years of criminal enterprise. Ren was skeptical. He pointed out that Crimson Dawn was just a criminal syndicate, that Qi'ra was not even Force-sensitive, that attempting to fight the Sith was suicide. But Qi'ra countered every objection with facts, with evidence of Crimson Dawn's reach and resources, with a vision of what they might accomplish together. The turning point came when she revealed what she knew about the Knight's history. The archivist had uncovered records suggesting that the Knights of Ren had once been far more than scavengers on the galaxy's fringes. They had been powerful, respected, feared. They had commanded territories and influenced events on a galactic scale. That legacy had been stolen from them, by circumstance, by the rise of groups like the Jedi and Sith, by the simple passage of time. But it could be reclaimed. If they struck now, while the galaxy was in chaos, while the Empire's attention was divided by the growing rebellion, they could write themselves back into history. The Knights conferred privately, their discussion hidden behind masks and the Force itself. When Ren emerged with his decision, it was acceptance, conditional, limited, but acceptance nonetheless. The Knights of Ren would ally with Crimson Dawn. They would help Qi'ra in her plan against the Sith. In exchange, they would receive resources, protection, and the opportunity to reclaim some portion of their lost glory. It was a fragile alliance built on mutual self-interest rather than trust, but it would serve Qi'ra's purposes. She had Force users now, warriors who could operate in ways that normal criminals could not, operatives who understood the dark side and how to fight those who wielded it. With the Knights recruited, Qi'ra had assembled all the pieces she needed for the next phase. It was time to announce Crimson Dawn's return, time to remind the galaxy that not all threats came from the Empire or the Rebellion. Time to steal Han Solo. War of the Bounty Hunters. The frozen form of Han Solo represented more than just a person. It represented connection points throughout the galaxy. The Rebellion wanted their hero back. The Empire wanted to ensure he remained captured. Jabba the Hutt wanted payment for old debts. Leia Organa wanted the man she loved. Luke Skywalker wanted his friend. Darth Vader wanted to ensure his plans for young Skywalker proceeded as intended. Everyone had a stake in Han Solo's fate, which made him perfect leverage. Boba Fett was transporting Solo to Jabba when Crimson Dawn struck. The bounty hunter was professional, careful, experienced, but even he couldn't account for the resources Qi'ra deployed. Crimson Dawn agents had tracked his route, had prepared the ambush, had brought sufficient force to overwhelm even Fett's considerable capabilities. The theft was surgical. Crimson Dawn operatives disabled Fett's ship, extracted the carbonite block containing Solo, and disappeared before significant resistance could be organized. By the time Fett recovered enough to give chase, the trail had gone cold. Qi'ra now possessed the most wanted prisoner in the galaxy. She moved quickly to capitalize on this advantage. She announced an auction. Han Solo would be sold to the highest bidder. The auction would take place on Qi'ra, a remote world where Crimson Dawn had established a temporary base. The invitation went out across the galaxy, to the Empire, to the Hutt clan, to other criminal organizations, even through carefully placed agents to the Rebellion. Everyone was welcome to bid for Solo, though Qi'ra had no intention of actually selling him to anyone. The auction was never about money. It was about forcing all these powers to gather in one place, to reveal their interest and their resources, to demonstrate that Crimson Dawn could command their attention. It was a statement of power. The response exceeded even Qi'ra's expectations. Representatives from all 5 major criminal syndicates attended. Darth Vader himself traveled to Qi'ra, determined to secure Solo for his plans. Princess Leia Organa infiltrated the gathering in disguise, hoping to free Han. Even Boba Fett arrived, seeking to reclaim his prize. Qi'ra presided over the chaos from her flagship, the Vermilion. The massive vessel served as her mobile headquarters, a symbol of Crimson Dawn's power and resources. From its command deck, she watched as the auction unfolded exactly as she had planned. The bidding grew fierce. The Hutts offered fortune in credits and territory. The Empire leveraged political concessions and military support. Lesser syndicates pooled resources to make competitive offers. The value attributed to Solo climbed to absurd heights. Then violence erupted, as Qi'ra had known it would. The Empire's forces clashed with Hutt enforcers. Bounty hunters fought for position. Rebel agents attempted their rescue operation. The gathering descended into a multi-faction battle that would later be called the Battle of Qi'ra. In the chaos, Qi'ra's true objectives became clear. She had never intended to sell Solo. She wanted to create conflict between the Empire and the Hutts, to destabilize the relationship between these powers, to sow discord among the criminal syndicates, to demonstrate that Crimson Dawn could manipulate events on a galactic scale. The auction ended without a sale. Boba Fett reclaimed Solo through a combination of skill, luck, and sheer determination. The various factions withdrew, many wounded, all frustrated. From an economic perspective, the auction was a failure. From a strategic perspective, it was a triumph. Crimson Dawn had announced its return unmistakably. More importantly, Qi'ra had accomplished something Maul never could. She had made the Empire notice her, and she had made Darth Sidious realize that someone was actively working against him. The reign begins. Following the Battle of Qi'ra, Qi'ra gathered her most trusted operatives aboard the Vermilion. The Knights of Ren still masked and silent. Janath Cha and the Orphans, elite mercenaries who specialized in creating chaos. Deathstick, a Dathomirian assassin with connections to the Night Sisters' legacy. Ochi of Bastoon, another assassin who had mysteriously developed a loyalty conflict with Sidious. And the Archivist, coordinator of Crimson Dawn's growing collection of dark side knowledge. To this assembled group, Qi'ra revealed the truth behind the auction. It had never been about Han Solo specifically. It had been about positioning, about creating the conditions for the next phase of her plan. She explained what she had learned from Maul, that Emperor Palpatine was the Sith Lord, Darth Sidious, that the Empire was fundamentally a Sith creation, that everything wrong with the galaxy, every injustice and cruelty, stemmed from this corruption at the heart of galactic government. For many present, this was revelation. They had known the Empire was oppressive, had understood it was evil, but knowing it was specifically built on Sith principles, recontextualized everything. Qi'ra laid out her vision. They would not simply oppose the Empire as the rebellion did. They would strike at the Sith themselves, would create chaos specifically designed to weaken Sidious and Vader, would use Crimson Dawn's resources and networks to accomplish what Maul had never achieved. They would end Sith rule over the galaxy. The plan was ambitious to the point of madness, but everyone present had already committed to madness by allying with Crimson Dawn. They listened as Qi'ra detailed specific operations, specific objectives that would serve the larger goal. First, they would create a war between the major criminal syndicates. The 5 syndicates, the Hutt Cartel, Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, the Qi'ra, and smaller organizations, would be manipulated into fighting each other. This conflict would destabilize the criminal underworld, creating chaos that would demand Imperial attention and resources. The Orphans, a group of highly trained operatives, would lead this effort. They would strike at each syndicate in ways that appeared to come from rival organizations, would create suspicion and paranoia, would whisper suggestions and false intelligence designed to turn the syndicates against each other. The syndicate war began within weeks. Mysterious attacks struck Black Sun operations, with evidence pointing to Pike involvement. Pike shipments were hijacked in ways that suggested Hutt culpability. Hutt territories experienced raids that looked like Black Sun operations. None of the syndicates knew for certain who was attacking them, so they blamed each other. Qi'ra and her advisors, Margot and Trinia, personally visited high-level operatives in multiple syndicates. They offered Crimson Dawn services as information brokers and mercenaries, and in each meeting, they planted seeds of discord, hints that the Emperor was unhappy with the Hutts, that Imperial favor was shifting, that now was the time to position for advantage. The syndicates, already paranoid from the attacks, responded exactly as Qi'ra predicted. They began competing for Imperial recognition, for the chance to become Palpatine's favored criminal organization. This competition intensified the conflict, turning the Cold War hot. While the syndicate war raged, Qi'ra deployed her other operatives on more delicate missions. Ochi of Bastoon, one of Sidious's own assassins, had mysteriously turned against his master. Qi'ra sent him to Exegol, the hidden Sith world where Sidious maintained secret facilities. There, Ochi infiltrated the Emperor's royal guard, the elite protectors who served Palpatine directly. In a single coordinated strike, he killed multiple guards, demonstrating that even Sidious's inner circle was vulnerable. The Knights of Ren received perhaps the most dangerous assignment. Qi'ra sent them to Fortress Vader on Mustafar, the heavily fortified stronghold where Darth Vader conducted his darkest work. Their mission was to steal the Screaming Key, an artifact Qi'ra needed for her ultimate plan. Infiltrating Vader's fortress was considered impossible. The dark side permeated the structure. Sensors monitored every approach. Automated defenses eliminated intruders automatically. But the Knights specialized in the impossible. They had spent years raiding ancient sites, stealing artifacts from locations most would never dare enter. They approached Fortress Vader as they would any other target, with planning, patience, and absolute commitment to success. The fortress's defenses were formidable, but they were designed to stop conventional assault. Not a small group of dark side users who understood how to mask their presence in the Force. The Knights penetrated deep into the fortress, navigating through chambers filled with Sith lore and dark side energy. They fought automated defenses and security droids. They bypassed traps designed to kill Force users. And ultimately, they reached the vault where Vader kept his most precious artifacts. They stole the Screaming Key and escaped before Vader even knew they had been there. The heist accomplished multiple objectives. It provided Qi'ra with an artifact she needed. It demonstrated Crimson Dawn's capability to strike even the most secure locations. And perhaps most importantly, it humiliated Darth Vader personally. The Dark Lord of the Sith had been violated in his own stronghold. Vader's rage at this violation was immediate and terrible. He launched an investigation to determine who had dared strike at him. His inquiries led him to discover something disturbing. Crimson Dawn had agents embedded throughout the Empire. Imperial officers, bureaucrats, even military personnel were secretly working for Qi'ra. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Imperial hierarchy. How deep did Crimson Dawn's infiltration go? How many seemingly loyal Imperials were actually agents of a criminal syndicate? Vader began a purge, executing anyone suspected of Crimson Dawn connections. But in his fury, Vader made a critical mistake. Some of those he killed were actually loyal Imperials. Some were innocent of the crimes he accused them of. Qi'ra had planted evidence and rumors designed to point Vader at the wrong targets, to make him paranoid, to turn his purge into a liability. The Empire began eating itself, destroying its own personnel based on suspicion and rage. Morale plummeted as officers wondered if they would be next. Efficiency degraded as positions went unfilled, and trust evaporated. Exactly as Qi'ra had planned. But she understood this success would have consequences. Sidious and Vader would eventually piece together what was happening. They would realize Crimson Dawn was orchestrating all of this chaos. And when they did, they would bring the full might of the Empire down on her organization. Qi'ra was counting on it, because she had one final card to play, an ancient weapon that, if used correctly, could trap the Sith and end their reign forever. she had the Fermata Cage, Hidden Empire. The Fermata Cage was an artifact of mysterious origin and terrible purpose. The archivist had discovered references to it in ancient texts, descriptions that suggested it could trap Sith Lords and freeze them in time. According to the legends, the cage had once held a powerful Sith Lord, preserving them for centuries until some future moment when they would be released. Qi'ra saw opportunity in these legends. She spread rumors through her network of agents, hints that the Fermata Cage actually contained a trapped Sith Lord, that when opened, this ancient being would emerge to hunt Sidious and Vader, would seek revenge against the Sith who had usurped its place. The rumors reached Palpatine's ears, as Qi'ra had intended. The Emperor contacted representatives of the 5 major criminal syndicates via holoconference, demanding they cease the conflict Crimson Dawn had orchestrated. In that conversation, the truth emerged. Crimson Dawn was behind the Syndicate War, behind the attacks on the Empire, behind all the chaos that had consumed the galaxy in recent months. Qi'ra had been exposed, her infiltration revealed, her manipulations laid bare. Sidious declared war on Crimson Dawn directly. He ordered the Empire's full resources deployed to destroy the Syndicate completely. Darth Vader was unleashed to hunt Qi'ra personally. The criminal organization that had dared challenge the Sith would be annihilated as an example to anyone else who might consider defiance. The Emperor's first strike came with overwhelming force. He attacked the Vermilion itself, bringing an Imperial fleet to bear against Crimson Dawn's flagship. The battle was brutal and brief. The Vermilion, despite its size and armament, was no match for concentrated Imperial firepower. Sidious destroyed the ship, believing he had killed Qi'ra and broken Crimson Dawn's leadership. But Qi'ra had anticipated this attack. She wasn't aboard the Vermilion when it died. She had already moved to the next phase of her plan, relocating to a location where she could prepare the Fermata Cage for its final purpose. The archivist had been struggling to unlock the cage's secrets. Multiple experiments had failed. The artifact responded to dark side energy but wouldn't open, wouldn't activate, wouldn't do anything that matched the legends describing it. She consulted with specialists, tried different approaches, assembled complex machinery designed to force the cage to reveal its function. Nothing worked, until she realized the cage needed massive amounts of dark side energy and life force to activate properly. It needed to be placed somewhere rich in both, somewhere that combined dark side corruption with abundant living organisms. Amaxine Station. The ancient space station had a dark history. It had been a repository for the Drengir, plant-like beings that channeled the dark side and fed on life force. Though the Drengir were long dormant, their presence had saturated the station with dark side energy. It was perfect for the Fermata Cage's activation. The archivist transported the cage to Amaxine Station and began the final activation sequence. As the artifact powered up, it consumed the dormant Drengir around it, feeding on their dark side essence and life energy. The disturbance it created rippled through the Force, felt across vast distances by anyone sensitive to such things. Sidious sensed it immediately. So did Vader. They both understood that Qi'ra was making her final move, that whatever the Fermata Cage truly was, it was now active and represented a direct threat. The Emperor arrived aboard the Executor, his massive superstar destroyer. Vader accompanied him. Both Sith Lords prepared to crush this final defiance personally, but Crimson Dawn had prepared for their arrival. Qi'ra's remaining fleet, everything she had left after the Vermillion's destruction, engaged the Imperial forces. It was a suicide mission in many ways. Crimson Dawn's ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but their objective wasn't victory, it was delay. They disabled the Executor's long-range weapons, forcing Sidious and Vader to land on the station personally if they wanted to stop the Fermata cage's activation. This was exactly what Qi'ra wanted. The trap was set. She just needed the Sith to walk into it. Sidious and Vader descended to Amexine Station with royal guards and death troopers, elite troops prepared for the worst. They cut through Crimson Dawn defenders with terrifying efficiency. These were the most powerful Force users in the galaxy, and they demonstrated why such power was feared. They reached the cage just as it fully activated. The containment unit exploded in a massive release of dark side energy, creating a disturbance that rippled through the Force across the entire galaxy. For a moment, every Force-sensitive being felt it, a vast, hungry presence awakening. But there was no ancient Sith Lord in the cage. That had always been a lie, a rumor Qi'ra had created to lure Sidious into confronting her. The cage's true purpose was different. It was a time lock, a device that could freeze beings in temporal stasis, trapping them outside normal time. And Qi'ra had activated it, with Sidious and Vader standing directly in its area of effect. The Sith Lords were frozen, trapped in a moment that would not end. Qi'ra had done it. She had trapped both Sidious and Vader, had removed the Sith from the galaxy. Everything she had planned, all the chaos and conflict, had led to this moment of triumph. The victory lasted approximately 5 seconds. The Knights of Ren, who were supposed to be defending the cage, made a different choice. They had evaluated the situation and reached the conclusion that overrode their agreement with Qi'ra. If Sidious and Vader remained trapped, the Sith might hunt the Knights down as revenge. But if the Knights saved the Sith Lords, they might earn protection instead. They destroyed the Fermata cage, releasing Sidious and Vader from temporal stasis. The artifact shattered, its power dispersed, Qi'ra's ultimate weapon reduced to scrap. Betrayed by her own allies, Qi'ra watched their plans collapse. Sidious was free, Vader was free, and they were both very, very angry. The Empire annihilated what remained of Crimson Dawn's forces at Amexine Station. Ships were destroyed, agents were killed, resources were seized. Qi'ra herself barely escaped, fleeing as her organization crumbled around her. Crimson Dawn was finished, defeated, destroyed by the full might of the Sith and the Empire. The hidden victory. In the aftermath of Amexine Station, the galaxy believed Crimson Dawn was gone. The Empire declared victory. Darth Vader hunted the remnants of Qi'ra's organization, eliminating anyone connected to the syndicate. Sidious turned his attention back to the rebellion, confident that the criminal threat had been neutralized. But Qi'ra survived, disappeared into the galaxy's shadows, using skills learned from years in the criminal underworld. She went aground so completely that even Imperial intelligence couldn't track her. Years passed. The Empire continued its rule. The rebellion grew stronger. And then, the Battle of Endor changed everything. Luke Skywalker confronted his father and the Emperor aboard the second Death Star. Anakin Skywalker redeemed himself by destroying Darth Sidious, breaking the Sith's hold on the galaxy. The Emperor died. Vader died, the Empire began its collapse. Somewhere in hiding, Qi'ra learned of these events. She had failed to destroy the Sith herself, but the Sith had been destroyed nonetheless. The rebellion, that scrappy alliance she had helped in small ways, had accomplished what Crimson Dawn could not. After the battle, as the galaxy began transitioning to a new era, two rebel leaders sought information about the events leading to Endor. Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa wanted to understand how the rebellion had learned about the second Death Star's location and construction timeline. This intelligence had been critical to their victory, but its source remained mysterious. They tracked down the archivist who had survived Crimson Dawn's fall. She told them the organization's story, about Maul's vision, about Qi'ra's campaign against the Sith, about all the chaos Crimson Dawn had created. Most importantly, she revealed Crimson Dawn's hidden victory. The intelligence about the second Death Star that enabled the rebel victory at Endor had come from Crimson Dawn agents embedded in the Empire. Even in defeat, even with the organization destroyed, those agents had continued working toward the mission Qi'ra had given them. Destabilize the Empire, weaken the Sith, create opportunities for freedom. The archivist also confirmed that Qi'ra had survived the Empire's purge. She had witnessed the fall of the Empire from whatever hiding place she had found, had seen the Sith destroyed, even if she hadn't been the one to destroy them. Luke and Leia were left to contemplate this information. Crimson Dawn, a criminal organization led by someone who had once betrayed Han Solo, had ultimately contributed to the Empire's defeat. Not in the way anyone expected, not through direct military action or political maneuvering, but through the slow, patient work of embedded agents and strategic chaos. Qi'ra herself remained a mystery. The archivist didn't know her current location, didn't know if she had retired from the criminal life or was building something new. The woman who had led Crimson Dawn through its most ambitious and dangerous phase had simply disappeared. But she had seen what she needed to see. The Sith were gone. The Empire had fallen. The galaxy had a chance at freedom, at building something better than what had come before. Whether that vindicated her methods, whether it justified the violence and chaos Crimson Dawn had created, those were questions without clear answers. Qi'ra had walked a dark path, pursuing what she believed was a righteous goal. She had used criminal means to fight against evil. She had sacrificed countless lives, including many of her own people, in pursuit of victory over the Sith. And in the end, someone else had delivered that victory. Not Crimson Dawn, but the rebellion. Not through manipulation and assassination, but through hope and sacrifice. Perhaps there was a lesson there. Perhaps Qi'ra had learned it during her time in hiding. Or perhaps she remained the same ruthlessly pragmatic survivor she had always been, simply waiting for the next opportunity to seize power. The galaxy would never know for certain, because Qi'ra, like Crimson Dawn itself, had become a shadow. A story whispered in criminal circles, a warning about the dangers of challenging powers greater than yourself, or perhaps an inspiration about how even criminal organizations could fight against tyranny. Legacy and epilogue. The story of Crimson Dawn spans decades, touches countless lives, and ultimately reshapes the galaxy's trajectory in ways both obvious and subtle. From its origins in Darth Maul's Shadow Collective to its final stand against Darth Sidious. The Syndicate represented something unique in galactic history. It was a criminal organization, certainly, trafficked in slavery, spice, weapons, and all the dark commerce that thrives in civilization's shadows. But it was also something more, a rebellion of a different kind, an attempt to fight the Sith using the very tactics and methods the dark side itself employed. Maul founded the Shadow Collective with revenge in mind. His vision was personal, driven by hatred of the Jedi who had cut him down, and the Sith Master who had discarded him. But in building that organization, in creating Crimson Dawn as one of its components, he inadvertently created something that would outlive his original intent. Dryden Voss transformed Crimson Dawn from a piece of Maul's larger plan into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that could survive regime changes and galactic upheavals. His sophistication, his understanding of how to operate in both legitimate and criminal circles, gave the Syndicate tools and approaches that pure muscle could never provide. Qi'ra elevated Crimson Dawn to its highest purpose. Under her leadership, the Syndicate became a weapon aimed directly at the Sith. She took Maul's hatred and Voss's sophistication and combined them with her own strategic vision, creating an organization that could challenge the most powerful beings in the galaxy. That it ultimately failed in its primary objective doesn't diminish what it accomplished. Crimson Dawn forced the Empire to divert resources and attention. It created chaos that weakened Imperial control. It demonstrated that even Sith Lords were vulnerable, that even the Emperor could be threatened by sufficient planning and audacity. And in its final act, through agents working independently after the organization's destruction, it contributed critical intelligence that helped the rebellion destroy the second Death Star and end the Empire. The members of Crimson Dawn, from the lowest operative to Qi'ra herself, paid terrible prices for these accomplishments. Many died. Others were hunted, captured, imprisoned. The organization that had seemed so powerful was ultimately crushed by Imperial might. But organizations are just structures. Ideas persist even when the structures that house them crumble. Crimson Dawn represented the idea that power could be challenged, that even the Sith were not invulnerable, that criminal networks could be used for purposes beyond simple profit. These ideas survived Crimson Dawn's destruction. They influenced how people thought about resistance, about fighting overwhelming power, about using unconventional methods against entrenched authority. In the New Republic era, new criminal organizations emerged. None claimed direct lineage to Crimson Dawn, but some echoed its methods. Small networks working in shadows, embedded agents gathering intelligence, strategic manipulation rather than obvious force. And somewhere in that new galaxy, Qi'ra existed. Whether she built a new organization, whether she retired from the criminal life, whether she found peace or continued fighting, these details remained her secret. But her impact on galactic history could not be denied. The girl from Corellia, who had been sold into slavery, who had clawed her way to power through intelligence and ruthlessness, who had dared to challenge Sith Lords themselves, had left a mark that would not fade. Crimson Dawn rose like the sun its name evoked, burned brightly, if briefly, across the galactic stage, and ultimately set, leaving behind shadows and legends and questions that would never be fully answered. The criminal underworld would remember Crimson Dawn as a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when syndicates grow too ambitious, challenge powers too great, reach too far beyond their capabilities. The rebellion, later the New Republic, would remember Crimson Dawn differently, as an unlikely ally whose agents provided critical intelligence, as a criminal organization that, for its own reasons, fought against the same tyranny the rebellion opposed. The Empire's survivors would remember Crimson Dawn with hatred, as the organization that infiltrated their ranks, that embarrassed Darth Vader, that dared to trap the Emperor himself, a cancer that had needed to be cut out to preserve imperial integrity. All of these perspectives contain truth. Crimson Dawn was a criminal syndicate, was an instrument of rebellion against the Sith, was a threat to the Empire, was a tool used by ambitious individuals pursuing their own goals. Perhaps the most appropriate legacy comes from understanding that Crimson Dawn was all of these things simultaneously. That, in the complex moral landscape of a galaxy ruled by Sith lords, clear distinctions between good and evil, between criminal and rebel, between selfish and righteous, become harder to maintain. Qi'ra herself embodied these contradictions. She was a survivor who had done terrible things to stay alive, a leader who had sacrificed countless lives for a goal she believed was righteous, a criminal who had fought against tyranny, a manipulator who had genuinely sought freedom for the galaxy. In the quiet years after the Empire's fall, after the Sith were finally destroyed, one imagines Qi'ra reflecting on everything Crimson Dawn had accomplished, and everything it had cost. Whether she felt pride or regret, satisfaction or emptiness, these emotions would have been hers alone. The galaxy moved on, as it always does. New powers rose to replace old ones. New conflicts emerged to replace resolved ones. The names and faces changed, but the fundamental struggles between light and darkness, between freedom and control, between individual ambition and collective good, these remained constant. Crimson Dawn's story ended, but the lessons it taught persisted. About the dangers of challenging powers greater than yourself, about the potential for criminal organizations to serve purposes beyond profit, about how embedded agents and strategic manipulation could sometimes accomplish what direct force could not, and about how one person, starting from nothing, sold into slavery as a child, could rise through intelligence and determination to lead an organization that challenged the rulers of the entire galaxy. The crimson sun had risen and set, but the shadows it cast remained, lengthening across the years, touching lives and shaping destinies in ways both subtle and profound. In those shadows, in those lingering effects, Crimson Dawn's true legacy lived on. And so we conclude this journey through Crimson Dawn's entire history. From Darth Maul's resurrection to Qi'ra's final gambit against the Sith, we've traced the organization's evolution from a fragment of the Shadow Collective to a force that challenged the Empire itself. This is a story about ambition and survival, about how desperation can forge determination, about the complicated relationship between criminal activity and rebellion against tyranny. It's a story about individuals making impossible choices in a galaxy that offers no easy answers. Thank you for joining me in exploring this dark chapter of Star Wars history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Crimson Dawn's story, remember to like this video and subscribe to Sith Lore for more comprehensive explorations of the galaxy's shadows. May your dreams be filled with the kind of darkness that makes the morning all the brighter. Await the dawn